Welcome to this evening's Savor event. I'm Andrew Waterhouse, Director of the Robert Mondavi Institute. Savor is a collaboration between the Robert Mondavi Institute and the UC Davis Library, a program designed to engage the public on topics where UC Davis is providing new insights through its research on food and beverages. While we're not yet able to be together in person, I'm delighted to welcome you virtually to the International Center here on the UC Davis campus. As you can see, we are live streaming tonight's program from outdoors at the International Center courtyard for the health and safety of our speakers. Thank you for attending. Tonight's question on the terroir of beer centers on the idea of place. And in that spirit, we would like to begin by acknowledging the history of this place, the University of California at Davis, and recognizing the indigenous people who once lived here where UC Davis stands today. For thousands of years, this land has been the home of the Patwin people. Today, there are 3 federally recognized Patwin tribes: Cachel-Dihi, band of Winton Indians of the Calusa Indian community, Quetzal-Dihi Winton Nation, and Yocha-Dihi Winton Nation. The Patwin people have remained committed to the stewardship of this land over many centuries. It has been cherished and protected, as elders have instructed the young through generations. We are honored and grateful to be here today on their traditional lands. And now let us move into tonight's program. The concept of terroir raises an important question for all of us. Where does our food come from? For wine, the question of the origin of grapes is embedded in our understanding of wine as a product from a specific place. The concept of terroir arose to better define what that meant. It refers to the site where the grapes grow, and in that, we have climate from that vintage and the soil of that site. Those are the 2 traditional components of terroir, but the concept has evolved to include the microbiome of the vineyard above and below ground. It has also come to sometimes include the action of the artisan who grows the grapes and makes the wine, since these decisions obviously affect the product. One usually unspoken factor is a given in winemaking. A person has brought a specific selection of vinifera, a variety as it were, to that site or location. It is never an indigenous plant, even in the most famous vineyards across Europe. In fact, one of the keys to a great wine is to find that site, that ideal site for a particular grape or variety, whether it's Pinot Noir, Cabernet, or Chardonnay. But today, we'll hear some interesting ideas that may change what you think about the concept of wine or beer that is from a particular place. I will now turn over the floor to my co-host, University Librarian and Vice Provost of Digital Scholarship, Mackenzie Smith, who will introduce tonight's panel.
Thank you, Andy. Welcome, everyone. My job is to introduce our panel tonight and to welcome you all to this wonderful Savor event. Our moderator this afternoon is Professor Glen Fox, who leads the brewing program here at UC Davis. Glen was appointed the Anheuser-Busch Professor of Malting and Brewing Sciences in the Department of Food Science and Technology in 2019. An expert in barley, malt, and brewing, he has published numerous books and articles, book chapters and articles, and is the senior editor of the book Achieving Sustainable Cultivation in Barley. Glen came to UC Davis from the University of Queensland in Australia, where he was a senior fellow. He has many years of experience working with barley breeding programs, malting and brewing industries around the world. Our first guest tonight is Missy Begay. She is co-founder and creative director of Bow and Arrow Brewing Company, the first Native American woman-owned brewery in the country, which produces beers using foraged, indigenous, and regionally sourced ingredients. Born in Albuquerque and raised on the Navajo Diné Nation, Missy is a granddaughter of Navajo silversmiths and weavers. Missy also holds an MD degree from the University of New Mexico and continues to practice medicine in her copious spare time, in addition to working with the brewery. I'm not sure how she has any spare time, but she also enjoys researching desert botanical plants, storytelling, and exploring the Southwest that she calls home. Our second guest tonight is Ron Silberstein, the co-founder of Admiral Maltings in Alameda, California. Admiral Maltings creates environmentally sustainable craft malts from locally sourced grains and sells their malts to breweries across the state, fostering connections between craft brewers, distillers, and the local agricultural community. Ron got his start experimenting with home brewing while still engaged in his first career as an immigration attorney. He started taking brewing classes here at UC Davis, which paved the way for his new career. In 1996, Ron opened Thirsty Bear Brewery in San Francisco, which went on to become the city's first certified organic brewery. He is also a founding member of the San Francisco Brewers Guild, which has grown to become the Bay Area Brewers Guild. Another busy man. And now, before I hand it over to our moderator and panelists, I'd like to remind everyone that if you have any questions, you can use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to submit them at any point during the panel. We'll take as many questions as we can during the Q&A period at the end of the program. Glenn, the floor is all yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Mackenzie and Andy, for the introduction, and I'm really pleased and happy to be here with Missy and Ron to be having a conversation that the industry seems to be having more frequently, and to sort of dig a little deeper into Andy's comments. When the wine industry considers terroir, it's very much about a grape producer then producing wine from that farm. Whereas the malting and brewing industries, there's many steps. The grain being produced, the maltster making malt, hops being produced, being delivered to a brewer. So it's a much more complex system. But there is opportunities for us to look at terroir of all these raw materials. Andy also talked about the character of the soil on those farms and how those farmers look at the sustainability of that. And before we dive deeper into the terroir conversation, I want to sort of touch on that sustainability part of the business. Ron, if I go to you first, because you're the maltster and the maltsters supply the brewers, and with your business, and congratulations on your recent medal win for the Craft Maltsters Cup, and that clearly indicates you know what you're doing and you think much bigger than just making malt. It's a much broader business model you're looking at. So can you just share some of that with us now on how you look at sustainability?
Well, I think sustainability, I mean, that's really one of the key reasons that myself and my partner, in particular Curtis Davenport, and Dave McLean got into this, is that barley is a fairly, given we're located here in California, barley is a fairly sustainable product, or agricultural product, in that it ideally needs about 18 inches of rainfall a year, and in the Sacramento Valley, that's about exactly what it gets. Curtis had been farming a little bit and doing a lot of fruit trees and things like that, and the amount of water that was being used was just boggling his mind, and not very available. So I think when we looked at sustainability, and that was something that came to mind. So sustainability can also be broken down, though, obviously, into other things. There's you start with the farmer, and you can look at the different techniques that the farmer's using to be sustainable. And then you can also look at the manufacturing process and look at how much sustainability is used in the manufacturing process. So we start with what we think is a crop, grains that need less water than let's say almonds or rice or fruit trees or nut trees or some of the other major agricultural products in California. And so that's in one sense a great start, but it's not enough. We like to work with, we do one of two things, I would say. We focus on either organic farming or regenerative, sustainable farming. With the organic farming, that's really got its own, you have your whole certification agencies, and they look to see, they're primarily focused on what chemicals are you using. Are you using chemicals that adversely, and GMO products too. I mean, they look at the genetic modification, but they're primarily focused on, okay, what are the chemicals you're using? What are they doing to the water table? What are they doing to the insects? What are they doing to human health? What are they doing to the workers who work with it? But it's not necessarily sustainable, because we feel that in farming, sustainability requires something more than that. And so we look at, in the ideal, I'd say some of our farmers are like this, and we're gaining more and more confidence to encourage farmers to do this. But number one, we want to see farmers that use cover crops so that the soil isn't exposed to the air, and I'll get into that a little more. I mean, it can keep moisture in the soil, it can keep soil from being eroded, it can fix nitrogen, it can add, it varies what sort of pests can grow, and it prevents the carbon within the soil from meeting the oxygen in the air and releasing CO2. So cover crops are pretty important. Crop rotation is fundamental, not growing the same crop year after year in the same place. Then we like to focus on no-till agriculture or minimum till agriculture, and that's where you're not plowing and tilling the soil to the degree that, again, the carbon that's sequestered in the soil gets released. And Andy first talked about looking at the microbiome below the ground and above the ground, and that's exactly what we're interested in too, is this healthy interaction between fungi and bacteria that are in the soil that are sequestering carbon, that work symbiotically for nutrient uptake, or to communicate stresses in the environment, or different needs for nutrition, and they seem to work really together. So no-till agriculture is something that's very important to us. And then, if it can be done, and this is a more difficult practice, but to rotate animals through there, be it chickens or sheep or cows or whatever, to both aerate the soil and to both get natural nitrogen, natural fertilizer in that soil. So that's sustainability in a sense, from the farmer, from the raw producer type thing. And then in the malt house itself, it's like, oh, are you going to use electric, or are you going to use gas? Are you going to try and reuse water? We put in a whole water reverse osmosis ultrafiltration system that sadly didn't work. We spent well over $100,000 and had our landlord contribute and all that, but at the end of the day, so you can try and do things to be sustainable and fail, but that is our goal. And there's other things we can do that gets more technical and mechanical, but it's kind of funner to talk about. We're at an agricultural school, so I'll talk about the agriculture.
Yeah, we will come back to a couple of things that you mentioned there, but I want to move to Missy and her business and how they look at sustainability from a brewing perspective.
Sure. So, I mean, we have as you mentioned, as the first Native American female-owned brewery, we have a very unique perspective on sustainability that, for us, ties really strongly with the sense of place and land, right? Because we're a 15-barrel brewery located in the Southwest in the high desert, where we often experience hundreds of years of drought, which definitely informs some of our business practices. I think for a small craft brewery like ourselves, we look at sustainability in terms of how can we not only brew beer in a sustainable way, but also how can we highlight the local indigenous ingredients in our area that, for myself, my ancestors, the Dene people, have been using for thousands of years. And that puts us in a unique position. It's challenging, right, to kind of think about, in this modern time that we live in, how do we make beer that we feel good about, but that also tastes great. And so one of the examples that I think highlights this is, in my research as a physician, I was researching medicinal plants that my patients were using in the local university. And through that research, I came upon what sounded uniquely like a indigenous hop, a wild hop. And so this hop, Neo-Mexicanus variety, actually is the first indigenous hop that only grows in the United States. It grows in the Rocky Colorado mountain region. And I found that this hop was, if you translate it from American to Navajo, it's actually speaks of the property of a wild hop. And we began to research this, and we actually used it in one of our specialty foeder beers. And so through this action, I mean, you really learn a lot about what's around you, and you learn a lot about how to harvest and forage a native plant. But you also have to think about the future generations. 50 years from now, 100 years from now, is this plant going to be available for our community, for our neighbor, for the next brewery coming up? So in that way, I think sustainability for us is not only undergoing sustainable practices, but really I think giving that knowledge, that awareness and education to the beer community, that we have to start thinking about the ingredients we use in this way, not only sustainably, but for the future, what's going to be left, and how can we change our frame of mind around that?
Sure. So for the people that have zoomed in tonight, if they don't understand the brewing process, we are talking about a process that's probably around 12,000 years old. And if we go back to imagine we were living at that stage, they knew more about sustainability because they knew how to conserve, because they didn't know when the next crop would come, what would be the next rain event, when the next drought would come. And I think we need to look at that in that perspective and learn lessons from that time to sort of understand our environment better. Now, Ron, you talked about the soil quality and using more local ingredients that is adapted to the soil. We've forced crops not local to this land. Certainly, a lot of farmers are very sustainable and very productive, and the agricultural industry is worth a lot of money. We're not going to try and dismiss that. Yeah. But I think we need to be aware that there's opportunities for using more local plants that are more adapted to our local climates. Do you see that fits with the malting sort of strategy as well, and how you could use more local materials?
Yeah, that's a good question, because in one sense, we're focused on a very traditional, European-derived barley being the, one of the best grains, or maybe it was from Mesopotamia, maybe it wasn't even from Europe, but barley being from, one of the best grains to make quality beer. But there's absolutely grasses and grains that are longer. People have been doing research into perennial. I'm spacing out the name right now of the
Kernza.
Yeah, Kearns is the main thing that people have been doing a lot of research on. But things that can have much longer roots and grow with less water and that sort of thing, and that is true. That is true sustainability and the stewardship of the land for future generations. That is absolutely critical parts of sustainability for making a product like beer. There's definitely more ways of being sustainable in how you in what grains you use, where you grow the grains. For example, one of the things is that barley can be dry farmed. Some of the best quality barley that we've grown is grown here in the Dunnigan Hills, the Hungry Hollow area, actually just right near here, just towards Woodland, and that being local is another. In other words, if you can use land that isn't used just for that isn't used just for irrigation purposes, if you can grow things dry in certain hills and other areas, then you're not only focusing just on whether you can get water, which is, we know, when we talk about future generations, are we depleting that water table, to our detriment, such as the land sinking and everything else, and that is a problem in the Central Valley. That is a problem here in California with using water that isn't being replenished. So, yeah, but I don't know other grains that could be, for example, crossbred with existing barleys to get the qualities that the barley contributes, but yet to get something that is perhaps perennial or plants deeper roots or this kind of thing. But that would be really interesting. I know, for example, in the UC program, we use a barley that was developed here at UC Davis in the barley breeding program. And it's called Buddha 12, and there's other really great barleys that are in line that are related to that. And one of the first things they bred it for really was for disease resistance to, in particular, this yellow dwarf virus. And so something that can grow well and in the region is really important. And in fact, one of the first seeds that UC Davis used in its certification program for malting quality barley was a landrace barley here called Atlas that the Spanish had brought. And again, like was mentioned in the very beginning, grapes aren't indigenous to any areas in Europe, and barley wasn't here. But once something's been here and it's spent several hundred years growing, and it does adapt to the climate here, that can be a contributor to real quality seed that can be grown. And I know that UC Davis in the early 1900s, for about 50 years there, that was the actual variety that they first looked to breed something that was locally adapt. But I'm not familiar with any other grains that we could. I mean, we use rye, we use oats, we use we've malted rye and oats and wheat.
Yeah.
Another one that was developed here at UC Davis, the Patwin wheat.
Yeah,
And so all of those are very well adapted and well suited, both from disease resistance and yield things, but not like Neo-Mexicanus.
Yeah, Neo-Mexicanus
where it's been there millions of years. No.
And Missy, for your brewing program, when and I know Bow and Arrow put out some amazing beers and there's new recipes coming through, are you thinking about the traditional raw materials, so some malt and some hops, but are you thinking about, well, we've got, at this time of the year, we've got a certain plant that's available to us, and how you might integrate some of that into your beer styles?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, speaking about grains and more hearty grains, we definitely use, in one of our most popular beers, the Denim Tuck's Blue Corn Pilsner, we use roasted blue corn from Santa Ana Pueblo.
Yep.
So I mean, corn, heirloom corn, is something, a part of our history. Every tribe relies on this as a staple, not only in their diet, but it also plays a key role in ceremony and in ritual. So when we started thinking about our everyday drinking Pilsner, it made sense to use a different fermentable sugar. So blue corn is locally milled and locally roasted, and we've used several varieties in our beer, and I think it's turning out to be great. I mean, I think thinking about seasonality, right? So Albuquerque has maybe 3-4 seasons. You have the hot summer, the winter, the windy season, and the spring. And I think for us, we do think about seasons. That's when we pick our forage ingredients, whether it be the hops, or we also have Navajo sumac and Navajo tea. Those are definitely dictated by the seasons, and we're okay with that. It's going to be limited. We can't brew it on a large scale, but we think for us for us, we're okay with that. Yep. And our customers seem to be very pleased.
Yep. So you mentioned community there, and when we've had conversations the last couple of months as we planned this event, I was always fascinated about how you would talk about the community that you worked with. Can you talk about some of the sort of efforts you're doing with your community and how you bring them in to your thought processes on harvesting certain plants and help them, or they help you in that process?
Sure, yeah. So it's been a wonderful experience so far. I think the community has been very supportive, And for us, it's kind of like we are taking, in a way, we're taking these first steps of being a native-owned brewery. What does that mean, and what does that look like in 2022? So not only do we work with our community to learn about perhaps specific plants that they're growing in their fields, we have different native farmers coming to us saying, hey, would you like to use this heirloom corn, or what about this plant? So we constantly have that communication with local farmers. In particular, it's kind of interesting because we have, since post-COVID, right, we're all kind of coming out of this, Navajo Nation was particularly hit by this, by the virus. And I think one of the great things that came out of COVID, and in my work as a physician, is that we've seen this regeneration of not only cultural values, but a renewed interest especially coming from Native American youth, in traditional farming practices of the Navajo and Pueblo people. Because we were in this pandemic, we were looking back to our traditional ways of the things that we grew to sustain us through these challenging times. And there are many local Navajo farms that have sort of sprouted up along the upper Fruitland area and the Four Corners area, who are starting to grow heirloom squash, heirloom corn. And they've even approached us, and they want to grow wild hops. And so I think it's a beautiful thing, right? It's like you don't expect these things to happen as a craft brewery, for local farms to actually want to kind of bring up these heirloom plants again. But for us, it's great, and I would really hope that we continue to be a part of that.
It's a great story. And Ron, I know you engage with your farming clients a lot. How is that developing? How did it develop, and is it developing more? I know you mentioned just before that you had a call from some farmers and they want to get involved. And how do you have that conversation about your beliefs on sustainability and your productivity, your business with them? And are they on board quickly, or are they going, oh no, that sounds too hard?
You know, it depends on the farmer, but again, we're super fortunate because we're here with this agricultural school, and that's how we met the first farmers that we worked with was through UC Davis Barley Field Day, and met some people who either have grown in the valley, or in this area, I call it Sacramento Valley, but have grown in this area. And what's curious is at first we worked directly with some farmers, and we were both learning. I mean, I don't come from a farming background. I had a brewing background, but not in farming. And they would grow it, and we had certain specifications we knew that we wanted to have, but they maybe didn't have storage facilities. They maybe didn't have facilities to really clean it, and so we had to outsource that and all that, and it became difficult. But what you learn is like what is necessary to successfully grow and store and be cleaned with this, and have a clean product. And so we have worked with people. For example, it was Tim Nuss. They're down more in Lodi, so more in the Delta area there. But just they want to go and start doing more regenerative practices, et cetera. And so he was asking me, what is it that we're interested in? And part of it, if we're going to work directly with a farmer, they do need certain capabilities. We can't take hundreds of tons of grain at once. We just can't. We don't have the storage facilities. We have two 25-ton silos that hold a little over 50,000 pounds each. But if a farmer can store on their farm, that's critical. If they can clean it, and then it has to get shipped to us. So there are these infrastructures, Adam. And so we've worked with another local grain. In the old days, they might have been called a grain elevator, called Adams Grain, and they actually started in the brewing industry, selling malting quality barley, because historically California, at one point pre-World War II, was one of the largest agricultural exports that we had, and we used to ship it to England. It was the quality was so good of what was grown, in particular right around here in the Dunnigan Hills, Hungry Hollow area, that it was shipped to England and all that. So they have had experience with that. One of the farmers we work with has actually a telegram his great-grandfather got from when the hills in the Dunnigan Hills burned, and they lost massive, and this was in the 20s, and they lost in 1920s, and they lost a massive crop. But it's like, oh, I hope you're okay and your family's okay, and this, they were so interconnected. But this has a relative history. It's a recent history. It's a new history, but it does still well there. So at this point now, we're becoming more well known. This has taken a long time to get back to your question, but we're becoming more well known. So farmers do contact us, and we communicate with them. The most recent one is Ron Crane from Crane Ranch in Petaluma, and a very different little ecosystem there. And his family has been farming there for hundreds of years. But they're going to be growing some organic barley for us right here in Petaluma, and it was someone that we came across through other people, and these kind of things are happening more and more, where farmers are reaching out to us. Farmers want to diversify. They can get a premium for a malting quality barley as opposed to just growing wheat to sell for commodities, or barley feed to sell as a commodity feed. Yeah. And so the fact that we can give them a premium pricing, and it is something that they can use in their crop rotation, that it isn't a water intensive crop, and that it's starting to be done. And here's this a buyer for it, has made it easier. And people are just, regenerative farming is growing, both I think because of climate change and because it's not sustainable the other way. You can't just keep putting petroleum-based inputs into the soil and hope to have anything left at the end of the day. It's far, far, far more complex than that.
Yeah, we were talking to Stu Whitcross from Voyager Malt in Australia last week.
He just won a medal.
He's just won a medal, and
the malt cup.
Having the same conversation. Like, so this isn't a unique thing to California or the US. This is a global awakening and understanding of thinking about sustainability. So I'm going to move on to the terroir conversation because you know, I think people have tuned in to hear us talk about this.
Yeah.
But I think we were setting the scene so we could understand all the contributors to the terroir and what might be some of those variables or factors that give something that unique flavour or special flavour. And Andy certainly brought up the story with the grapes and the wine and terroir, but you know, the grape industry can't claim that as its own. There's a lot of other industries that talk about terroir, and coming from Australia, we would always think about getting New Zealand lamb. It had a unique flavour. We would import New Zealand lamb, and we'd also, some of the seafood we get, you knew it came from a different sort of the Southern Ocean, or it came from the Barrier Reef when you were getting that. So it just had that distinct environmental terroir flavour. So we're having this conversation around the beer industry now, and for a long time the beer industry has been a bulk industry. Thousands of tons of malt needed to produce thousands of gallons of beer. So sometimes it's nigh impossible to distinguish any varietal or terroir coming from the raw material. But now with the sort of growth of the craft brewing industry and the craft malt industry, we're back having this conversation. So I will start with the maltster about terroir, and certainly with pilsners and lagers and lightly hopped ales, where we would say they're more malt forward flavours, we can now say that yes, we're seeing some varietal effects with the barley varieties. How do you view that, and how do you approach that from the malting perspective?
Well, it's another reason really why we were so excited, you know, my partners and us to get involved in this, is we wanted to bring back that sense of place. Now I'm talking, again, it's the maltster, it's the bigger thing. Missy's going to have another really cool perspective on it. But from the traditional ingredient standpoint, yes, there's hops, there's malt. But I would say that historically, what defined a place, whether it was in the Czech Republic in Pilsen, the water, the softer water there, the kind of hops, the noble hops that grew there, the way the barley varieties that grew there, that was a sense of place, and that gave a very distinctive style. Burton-on-Trent in England, almost the opposite. We got an ale. We have much harder waters. Yeah. We have different hops there, you know, and so historically, terroir was huge in beer. It's really only in the modern advent of industrial-sized production of barley, of hops, of things like that, where it got teased out. Wine is a little different too, in that you get all the water is already in the grapes, and beer is what, 90 some odd percent, what, 98, I don't know, it's a high percentage of water, and so the water is certainly going to affect it. But if we have some grains that are being grown right near here within, you know, 40-mile, 90-mile radius, we have water. Now that's going to be added by the specific brewer, but they will get a variety. We just use one variety, and it'll be the same variety grown in the same locations, in the same climate, and that sense of place, that terroir, will be teased out in combination with the water they're going to be using because of their locality, and things like that. And then the hops would be the last thing that could confuse terroir or enhance it. And there's absolutely positively more and more California hop growers. I don't think they're at the level, sorry, California, of the Oregon and Washington growers yet, but they're doing it. And it's better and better all the time. And we even keep, just for that sense of place and all that, we have a little link on our website, and we have nothing. These are all the people growing hops in California. If you want to make and California is a pretty big state, but still it's more than, you know, 6 and 8 barley varieties you talked about, you know, in Western Australia, and you know, thousands and thousands of tons. I mean, we won't even make more than 1,400 tons in a year, and we're gonna, you know, of barley, we're essentially using, well, we use a few varieties. We'll use some of the historic, the Atlas, we'll get some Copeland up in Tule Lake, but that's it's all grown right there. It has so if you get our organic a barley that was grown up in Tule Lake with the Copeland, which is a more traditional variety, it's going to have a flavor that's different. And you know, and likewise, the guy in Petaluma, Ron Crane, he's going to be growing a new. Again, it's a more large variety. It's called Genie, but again, it's a very commercially available Amba variety. Or we're going to be. We work with Sierra Nevada a little bit. We toll them off, and they do a whole estate barley program, and they're growing this year, in addition to some of the Butter 12 and the Tahoe that was developed here, they're growing this purple Egyptian barley, which is going to be really interesting to use. Again, it's more heirloom-like, and so and we'll see how suited it is for there. Or you know, I talked with a farmer up in Washington and near the San Juan Islands, and he grows Scots beer, which is the barley variety that the Romans were growing. Something like that. You know, in England. And so it is fun to do these different things, but the sense of place at the end of the day is going to be a consistent variety, grown consistently in a certain region. And then if you can add to that some of the other things. So terroir can almost be bits of terroir, or, it just whatever one can get in our global system now.
And from a brewing perspective, where the brewers are challenged with adding all these raw materials together to produce assistant quality products, and certainly the large brewing companies, that's the challenge, and they do a great job. You know, consistency is hard, and they do a great job, especially for pilsners and lagers, where you sort of any imperfections can be quickly noticed. So I think the terroir story definitely fits better with the craft brewing industry. So, Missy, how does Bow and Arrow look at that and take advantage of certainly the malts you source and the hops you source, but any other ingredients you add?
Sure. I mean, I think we certainly brew our fair share of lagers and hazy IPAs, but I think that where we've taken a unique approach is not only using alternate grains like blue corn, but there also was a Sonoran white wheat variety in southern Arizona, and we've been able to source some of that to use in our saison. And so, you know, it's interesting. Sonoran white wheats grown in southern Arizona, originally heirloom crop by the Pima people, is highly adapted to the area, grows in alkaline soil, and we found other breweries in southern Arizona were using it, and so we were able to use it, and it does very well in our saison. One of the other beers that we've been really excited to brew is from our Foederland series, and it's called Foederland. And so we challenge ourselves to make the beer with every ingredient being as local, as regional as possible. And so we used Troubadour maltings, malt for this, and we took it a step further. We also set yeast, wild yeast fly traps regionally.
Yeah. Nice.
And so we set them in these local lavender fields that are not too far from the brewery. And we're able to get a very complex mixture of like not only lavender but honey and sort of this like peach skin honey. And so in the end we had also local hops sourced from Billy Goat Hop Farms, which is up in Colorado. It's, you know, when you drink this, it's like, wow, drinking this beer and everything from it, from the yeast down to the hops and the malt, everything was as locally sourced as possible. It is a beautiful beer. I mean, it's a favorite in our brewery, and you can only have it at Bow and Arrow in Albuquerque. And so a lot of people are traveling through. They want to know what is the one beer that evokes this sense of place, sense of terroir, and it's really that Foederland beer that's just so locally inspired. And so I think, you know, we challenge other breweries to do this all the time. When we do beer collaborations, we worked with a brewery in South Carolina, and we brewed a saison as well. And they said, hey, you're using heirloom blue corn from the local pueblo. We're going to use our heirloom red variety of corn. And so we brewed a beer with them, and they were simply inspired by that. And so I think that's the challenge to other breweries across the country, is that we need to start thinking about our beers in this way, and we should really challenge ourselves to undergo these exercises, because it teaches you a lot about where your ingredients come from.
Yeah.
And it makes for a better product.
Absolutely, and I love that story with using the yeast that's grown on the lavender.
That's
and it just takes us back hundreds and hundreds of years around the monasteries where they grew orchards, and whatever tree happened to be flowering, and the yeasts were floating into the brewery, and that was the flavours and aroma it imparted in those wild fermented beers.
Right.
Ron, in terms of terroir, do you have that conversation with your farmers, and do you have that conversation with the brewers you supply your malt to?
Yeah, with both. I mean, our head maltster Curtis, even. I mean, we're noticing differences on what's grown in the hilly lands that's dry farmed, or what's more on the flat part where it can be irrigated and things like that. But that's one of when I give a tour of the brewery and all that to brewers, you know, also to other people, but primarily the brewers, I talk about that. Hey, historically, California beer was a thing. You know, we had it's what we grew out here. It was malted. There were malts. Malt houses, maltings or malt houses. I call it a malt house in San Francisco. Some in the breweries itself. Bauer and Schweitzer was one of the oldest ones that survived right until even both Anchor Brewing and Sierra had gotten a little bit of malt from them. They were in North Beach, and there was malting facilities in Oakland. I mean, and so when they used California cluster hops and the malt, maybe it was grown from Atlas barley that had been, you know, growing in the California area for hundreds of years, you know, after the Spanish brought it, and then that water. I mean, it had to be a distinctive thing, and we can do that again. If you're a San Francisco brewer and you got your Hetch Hetchy water and you have your Sacramento Valley malting quality barley, that's going to impart, as long as you're not mixing it. Again, if you can, and that is what globalization gave us. We could imitate any kind of beer we wanted to do. If we wanted to get these hops from the Czech Republic and this malt from England or whatever, we could do all that, and then we could chemically adjust our water. But we're like, wait a minute, you know, aren't we? Why not embrace what we have here? That's what's unique. That's what our identity, to a degree, is, you know, as much as we can. So I do talk about it both with farmers. I want to know where they're planting stuff, and we look at the different quality. Is it a, you know, lower protein content, or is it a, you know, plumper kernel, or is it you know, just what the qualities are of that particular thing. So yeah, we talk about both with customers and with the farmer.
Yeah, and Missy, for your brewery, I'm going to guess this is a natural progression for you to think about terroir, rather than think, oh, isn't that a catchy thing? Well, let's get into terroir. I think for you especially, you're so connected to the land and your people.
Right.
That is just a natural thing for you, rather than being a forced thing. Oh, all the breweries are getting into this terroir, let's think about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I mean, I was just talking with my partner and wife Shyla about this, that for us, it's not only ingrained in our DNA and in our families, our way of life, but you know, in our sense for survival as Native people, this is the lands that we brew on, our homelands. This is something that people think about every day because they're still living off the land to survive, whether it's growing traditional cornfields or, you know, getting medicinal herbs. It really is still a way of life for communities to live this every day because, you know, families have to make a living off of it. Our culture is uniquely tied to plants. In a way that they are living people. We can't survive without each other. And so from that lens and that perspective, it definitely influences the way we do our business and the types of beers that we want to create.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, unfortunately, we're running out of time. Can you believe it?
No.
I know we're going to continue this conversation
yes.
for a lot longer into the evening, but I think it's time we look at some Q&A. We've got some questions coming, I believe. So a general question, moving forward, do you see craft beer being labelled made in Dunnigan Hills barley? Ron, I guess that's for you.
The truth is, when the farmers here exported their barley to the London Barley Exchange, the farmers' names were stamped on that. And they said, oh, this is sun-kissed barley because we don't get... So, yes, and we actually, to a degree, we actually say, you can go into the pub, the Rake at the Malthouse, or you can look up on our certificate of analysis that we put together for each thing, and we'll tell you which farmer grew it.
Yeah.
So absolutely, and the goal is that it creates meaning with the brewer, and that's, again, we're just trying to connect points between farmer, brewer, and distiller, and maltster, so that we are working together to recognize what do we like, what do we want to use.
And certainly the customers appreciate that they can have some connection to the farmer and the maltster and the brewer. And historically, well, not even very historically, only going back about 60 years, in the UK, Maris Otter was a variety.
Perfect.
And Golden Promise was another variety that were sort of seen as the flavoursome varieties, and then as breeding moved on, high yields, they lost sort of some favour with farmers, but there was always a small group of farmers that kept growing these varieties. I'm not sure it was financially worth it for them because the yields weren't so good, and in the early 2000s there was this sort of resurrection of these varieties. Now when we talk about Maris Otter flavour and Golden Promise flavour, I think we will see more of this. It may not be the farmer, him or herself, but certainly the variety we can claim this is Butter 12 beer, and it was grown in this region. And I think certainly the craft brewers need to take advantage of that sort of labelling. Everything's grown within 100 miles, and here's the farmer and his family or her family, and here's the maltster in Alameda. So I think we're going to see more of this. Missy, how you'd be happy to label your beers?
Oh yeah, I think the farmers that we work with would be ecstatic to label where a specific corn variety comes from or whatnot. So yeah, I think they should be acknowledged.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they feel so connected.
Yeah.
I mean, when we were doing a farmer maltster brewer event recently for San Francisco Beer Week, one of the comments of the farmers was like, I can't believe, the great thing about growing this barley is that now I can come into this pub and I can actually, they're reconnecting to it too, in a way that if they're growing feed barley or corn or whatever, sunflower seeds or whatever they're growing, or nuts that they don't get to connect with. So it's a connection for everyone.
Yeah, excellent. So a question specifically for Missy, what specific medicinal plants do you use in your beers, and what flavors and qualities do they impart? This could take a while.
It could take a while. So, I mean, one of the beers that we talked about was our foeder aged farmhouse ale, made with Neo-Mexicanus hops.
Yeah.
So Neo-Mexicanus hops traditionally are used by many Native people in the region. Hops in general have a great antiseptic quality, so they were used not only in infection and trying to make things clean, but they have anti-inflammation properties as well. So when you converse with people about Neo-Mexicanus, it's like it was this new hop, right? It was a hot new hop of several years ago, and since then many varieties, Medusa and then so many other Sabro have been made from crossbreeding the hop. But that is a medicinal hop that's still used today. When you talk about traditional medicine, it's often hard to connect the Navajo term with the Latin term. So lots of this knowledge isn't necessarily written down, but many common use plants that are found in your backyard in the Southwest have a lot of medicinal properties. So Navajo tea, digestive tonic, often used to soothe the tummy ache, or we also use these ingredients in several of our barrel-aged beers. So when we make these beers, we don't often tote it has a medicinal property, but we usually use it for the flavor, the subtle flavors that it imparts. So that's been really fun for us to do.
Yeah, unfortunately we can't label beer as a health food yet. Maybe one day. So Ron, one for you. Granted that California is a fairly large state and there's a few people here, is there a classic California style?
Well, the steam beer, a California steam beer, which Anchor built their brand on, would be one of those. It is a large state, and that's why up in Tule Lake, where we get our organic barley, the Buddha 12 doesn't even grow well up there. There's UC Davis has some growing stations and test stations up there, and never performed well. It really is for this area, and so that's a really good point. But it's still smaller than U.S. As far as that goes. But all of what we grow really is grown pretty much in the greater Bay Area, from the Delta to northern, around here, and then all the way up in Tule Lake. We're not, we are bringing someone in from Petaluma now, but we're not, all over the state. Yeah. We're a small. That's one of the things that we can do too, is when you're small batch, you can get your product to someone much more quickly, and so that has a heavy influence on we believe on the quality of our product, to be able to get fresh malt to people, and so comes from smaller region, small produced and all that. But yes, it is. Yep. We sell down to San Diego all the way up to Northern California. Breweries up into Trinity and Shasta. So yeah.
So Missy, somebody's interested in your beer made just from corn. Can you describe the taste of beer made with corn? And we know there's a big brewer in the US that uses corn as an adjunct anyway. But if you're using your blue corn, is there a specific taste, or you would only make a certain style with that raw material?
Yeah, so this is often a really common question that we get, and corn is a very old ingredient. There are indigenous people in Mexico that make corn from processed chicha, Tepache beer, which is just a very corn based. But also, our blue corn beer is not blue. It's often a really common question, but it heirloom corn. A lot of the heirloom varieties of corn have a higher protein content. And so I would say that this beer imparts more of a earthy flavor, and so in our Pilsner, it not only makes it the body a bit more dense, but it imparts like a really light, earthy flavor with, I would say, probably a hint of plum. So there's a hint of sweetness. And that, again, people love that beer, and I think...
so do you have to process that corn a little differently to if you're just using malt additions?
Correct. So it needs to be roasted, and so that the product can be broken down easier.
Yeah. Sounds delicious.
I'd like some
so we're talking about some native grains, and I think we'd all have to put our thinking caps on for some native grains and maybe go back a couple of centuries to find that, but there would be some native grasses, and I think this is probably where domestication has had the advantage over native grasses, because people were looking for larger grain or plants that produced more seed, and that just cycled its way through, and that's where we've got barley with big plump grains and wheat that is big and plump. Let's go back 10,000 years, and they were just using native grasses that were still quite small and that sort of thing. We probably don't know our native species well enough to...
I confess, I don't. Yes.
Yeah,
no.
But I think it's a question
it's
that
a great question.
we will continue to talk about.
I'd love to learn more about it.
Yeah, this was a thing that was happening in Australia quite a few years ago, and continues currently, where we were working with Indigenous communities because they knew the land and they knew what fruits and foods were sustainable, were used for medicines, and then they basically got dismissed when a certain group of people turned up a couple of hundred years ago. Right. But now that's sort of re-emerging, and we're taking advantage of that knowledge, and I think we need to connect with some more local Patwin people to see if there's some native grasses that we could consider.
Yeah, do the own version of Kernza, because from what I understand, it needs such cold winters for proper vernalization. But anyway.
We're probably running out a little bit of time. Any thoughts on growing barley or hops for flavour versus more practical concerns like disease or yield?
Oh yeah, I mean, you nailed it when you talked about with Maris Otter or Golden Promise, and I think that's one reason we're so proud that the in the Pilsner category are made from the bud at 12. It does have a unique flavor. I don't know how I wish my lexicon were better in terms of showing it, but there is a graininess, there's a softness, there's a peculiarity to it that is noticeable. Like, ooh, I can tell that, and so I think that the varieties developed here and some of the offshoots are going to be very interesting in that sense, and it has been recognized, as having a good flavor. So that's. Mm-hmm. But yes, I do think flavor is, people will argue over that. Some people say the most important thing to flavor contribution is the kilning process, or some people may, So you'll get different, or the water, or other things, or the yeast, or the pH of the mash, or who knows. But yes, I absolutely think that over time one can tease out very distinct characteristics, including flavor from different varieties.
And Missy, for the Neo Mexicanus, do you think there's a risk it could lose or have some of its unique character diluted if they're trying to breed it so it actually is a high yielding variety, or try and fit it into a more typical hop structure, plant structure?
I think that it could develop loss of that disease resistance. I mean, this is something we didn't talk about, but protecting the genetic diversity of our crops is also, raw ingredients that we use is very important. And so that's why we don't really divulge a whole lot about where we pick it, just because I think when you start to overuse it and crossbreed it, it does lose some of that genetic diversity, which makes it so keen for growing in the high desert. But I think that is something that we have to discuss, that these hybrid hops, Sabro and Medusa, they are used in large-scale commercial breweries now. And so what is the harm in doing that? I think as long as you recognize that protecting that genetic diversity is important, I think that's okay. Yep. But it is something that we need to talk about more.
Absolutely, absolutely. So a couple more questions. Can craft brewers compete in the difficult market for hops? And I think this is to do with just the huge demand for hops. And several years ago, there was a shortage of hops. There's a lot of hops used, and in craft breweries that are brewing double and triple IPAs, they're adding significant amounts of hops.
And money.
Yeah.
And it does cost some money.
I think the question should be, can craft breweries exist without IPAs?
Yes.
And the hazy IPA.
Well, I think the pendulum's starting to swing back a little bit to more Pilsners.
Yeah.
Well, and we, for example, to get people to care about malt as being more than a sugar for fermentation, and more than the specialty malts, if you're putting a little crystal or a little chocolate in, we often say, hey, malt is the soul of beer. It's Dr. Lewis, one of your predecessors, used to say, hops is the salt on the potato, and but malt is the potato, and so I think that, and what we're trying to even say is, like, all sorts of breweries list the hops right on the can or whatever. We use this hop, this hop, this hop, and that's all they list, as if that's what beer is made of. So we're trying to encourage people to talk about the malt that they're using and stuff, or just like you would talk about the blue corn or the Neo Mexicanus, or any other particular native plants, and that is important too. And so we're just trying to say, hey, hops, beer is more than hops.
Yeah, and you mentioned that the phrase "malt is the soul of beers." I went digging to sort of, when I was talking about that to my students, and they said, well, how long have we talked about this? And I went, oh, it's been a while, but I couldn't actually define a while. So I went digging, and it's the mid-1800s where somebody has first stated malt is the soul of beer.
There you go. And
that probably lasted about 100 years, and then hops came through, and certainly the IPAs here and around the world. So malt seemed to be taking the back seat, but now I think malt is now at least in the front seat. It might not be driving, but at least sitting in the front seat along with hops and yeast.
It is easier to identify one hop, and we put this hop in our beer, and it does make an instant impact. There's no doubt about it. But anyhow.
Okay, so that's an interesting question. The research in my lab. Well, we're covering quite a few topics, and we're certainly still exploring this interesting dry hopping effect and hop creep that some breweries, when they're dry hopping for a little bit more aroma. I've got a student working on that. We're looking at upcycling spent grain and how we can use spent grain in a more meaningful way that brewers can take advantage of that. I've got a student looking at low and no alcohol beers using natural fermentation processes, not sort of some processing to remove the ethanol. We're looking at a whole range of different yeast strains. The FAF collection here has a couple of thousand yeast strains that we're exploring that have never been looked at in terms of potential brewing properties. So we're starting to screen those, and they might have some unique characters. So that's just some of the research we're doing. So we're sort of crossing the whole span. We're helping the barley breeding program here in looking for new barley varieties as well. So a lot of the basics, but also the malting and brewing processes as well we're involved in. So yes, let's get away from me. Why is hops not grown around Sacramento anymore? We have a hop yard road at Pleasanton, Hop Kiln Winery in Sonoma. used to be the largest hop grower. So basically, we know that hops were grown significantly before Prohibition,
Yeah.
a bit like barley. But then Prohibition basically stopped a lot of that. There was still a lot of home brewing going on and a lot of illegal things happening. But in terms of mainstream commercial production, barley and hops seem to disappear. But I think the opportunity's there, and as you mentioned before, Ron, there's a number of growers now in the region wanting to get back into hops.
There are. If you want to see some, we have a little, we have a link on our website to a lot of the atomic hops and Thompson hops, and there's just all sorts of hop farms that are springing up, and you could on the malt page of our website, we talk about the local growers. So that's one resource, you know, people can use.
Sure. Yeah, and I think it's the Californian industry is thinking about this, understanding the history of hop production in California, and how they can sort of bring that back.
And quite frankly, the California growers are getting a lot more money for their grapes than for their hops.
Yeah, well, farmers still have to make money.
Yeah.
Everyone's got to make some money. So an interesting question, and I'm not sure how we would answer this one, but how could I look for local plants that might be suitable for adding to beer? How to start? That is a good question.
That's a great question.
And I would say that you probably could start by looking through some of the history books on brewing history, because there are probably some old documents or old papers where people were adding alternatives to malt and hops. We know that there's about 10 or 12 plants we can use as a substitute for hops. Wormwood, certainly spruce tips. A lot of beers are brewed now without using hops at all, they're just using spruce tips. So it would be a case of probably let's go to that whatever search engine you use most frequently and search for that thing. And I think you would still find a lot of people that are exploring this already.
We at one point we were involved in, I just have a foggy memory, but when I was brewing at Thirsty Bear, now we did this, an organization came to us and it was called Beers Made by Walking. So you can Google that one too, or search engine that one too. And that, we literally were looking at, you know, native plants, and we incorporated some of those, and a whole group of breweries did this, and we poured beer at the Exploratorium and I don't know where else. And it hasn't been done lately, to my knowledge, but that would be interesting, you know, to dig that up. But yeah, I mean, you must have a lot of.
Yeah, I mean, I think for anybody who's interested in home brewing at that scale, I think looking to historical references is really important. There are many beer books written out there about ancient beer recipes. And I think also asking your local agricultural extension office also has a lot of information in your region. They're really interesting. I think where this comes up most often is people who are in culinary areas, culinary clubs, you know, whether they're brewing kombucha or cider or making their own natural wine. This is where you'll find a lot of resources into what people are brewing with. But you're right. I mean, just looking into your local area, your local library should have a lot of resources.
Yeah. Okay. Last question. Is there an inherent limit to local beer due to limits of space or other resources? And I think we're just generally nodding.
Well, yes. It depends where you are, but yeah, of course.
Yeah.
There'll be a limit. I mean, whether it's on the larger production, I mean, Missy should speak to it too, you know, in a more localized way. But yeah, it depends what the resources are being dedicated to locally, as to how far outside of that region you'll have to go to find the proper materials.
I think we talked about this extensively, in that is a part of sustainability, in that you have to be okay with it being local and not large scale.
Yeah.
And I think you asked that, what's a measure, is that successful? You know, that's a question for each company to decide, and that is based on your core values and you know, why you're doing what you're doing. And so I think I'm okay with that limitation, you know, to some extent.
Yeah.
But that's just the nature of how we're doing things.
Sure. Yeah. Bonus question. We're not getting out of this easy, are we?
I know.
Bonus.
What ingredient have you always dreamed of brewing with but never tried?
Well, I know personally what I would like to malt next is malt corn, so that it doesn't have to be roasted or gelatinized or anything like that, but that you could brew, you know, whether it's the Mexican style lager or just a classic pre-prohibition lager from the U.S. and where you could use a really nice Pilsner malt and a malted corn, but I'd love a blue corn.
Yeah.
You know, really cool, you know, flavorful heirloom variety. That would be, you know, that's, you know, but I'm a simple guy. I don't need, you know, hibiscus in my beer.
Yeah. I'm going to go the opposite route and say that a wild yeast captured from an area that I grew up with in Canyon de Chelly.
Yeah.
There are wild peach trees in that area, and so I'd love to get some yeast traps in that canyon and see what that tastes like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would agree with both of those things.
Yeah,
and
nice.
certainly
You made me go,
We'll make
"Ooh, I
going
like
the way
that."
of,
Let's have that here.
going the way of yeasts
Yeah.
and the FAF collection here. We're just starting to scratch the surface on the diversity there.
Yeast.
And there's a significant number, much more yeast than I'll have time to screen
Yeah.
over the next decade or so. So we finally got to the end, but I know we will continue this conversation. And certainly our thanks to both Ron and Missy for taking the time to come to Davis and sharing your stories and your views. We've spent the last 2 years Zooms. I've Zoomed classes, lectures, meetings. I've seen Ron at a couple of functions.
Yeah.
First time meeting Missy and Shyla. So to sit here with you in person is just great. I'm really pleased we could do it. So again, we also want to thank you tonight for joining us. Thank you for your questions. If you have any other comments, there's opportunity to do that in the feedback just before you sign out. We want to thank you, as I said, and wish you the best of good nights. Thank you.